Imagine being told your entire life that the ultimate proof of the divine was something like a magical fruit dropping straight from the sky, or, a virgin birth.
Right.
But then what if you found out that those exact miracles were actually just mistranslations?
Yeah, that changes everything.
Exactly. What if the real story wasn't about magic at all? What if it was actually a gritty, genuinely dangerous political rebellion by a woman who basically took down a corrupt empire?
It completely, it shatters the lens through which we view ancient history. I mean,
Yeah.
we're so accustomed to reading these texts as, well, fantasy or mythology, right?
Absolutely.
And because of that, we miss the profound and often really terrifying human effort that's buried underneath all that centuries-old dogma.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today. We are taking a deep dive into a highly rationalist, fiercely debated reinterpretation of, well, one of history's most famous figures, Maryam, or Mary, the mother of Jesus. And to do this, we are looking at a very specific set of sources for you today. We've got lecture notes and detailed textual analyses based on the work of the 20th century scholar Ghulam Ahmad Parwez.
Specifically, we're looking at his rational analysis of Surah Al-Imran. That's verses 33 through 37 from the Quran.
Right. But before we get into the weeds, I do need to pause and offer a really crucial disclaimer for you listening. Because this is heavy stuff.
Very heavy.
The sources we are exploring today contain highly specific, potentially controversial theological and historical interpretations. Like, these ideas challenge deeply entrenched orthodoxies across multiple faiths.
We're talking Christianity, traditional Islam, Judaism. It really touches all of them.
Exactly. So I want to make it explicitly clear right up front. We are impartially reporting on the content provided to convey the ideas contained in the original source material. We're not endorsing these views. We are not taking sides, left or right, religious or secular, and we're not validating this framework over any others. Our mission here is simply to unpack a profoundly unique intellectual perspective for you.
And that neutrality is essential, I think, because the claims Parwez makes, they are structural.
What do you mean by structural?
Well, he argues that to understand what actually happened historically, you have to realize that the language of the text was effectively hijacked over centuries.
Hijacked? Wow.
Yeah. Words that originally described very real socio-political realities were gradually infused with magical or mystical meanings, primarily as these texts interacted with, ascetic and Persian mystic traditions later on.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we want to figure out what Maryam actually did, we have to start with the vocabulary.
We have to. It's foundational.
The source material refers to this as Luqatul Quran, or root word analysis, which, if I understand this correctly, Arabic is a deeply, almost mathematical language based on root letters.
That's a great way to put it. It's very formulaic.
So you don't just look up a word in a modern dictionary. You trace its three-letter root back to its most ancient, physical, like desert-dwelling usage to find the true meaning.
Exactly. In Semitic languages, that triconsonantal root is essentially the DNA of the word.
The DNA.
And Parwez argues that if you strip away the centuries of theological baggage and look at that raw linguistic DNA, the entire landscape of Maryam's story changes.
It goes from a fairy tale to a political thriller.
It really does. So let's look at the first major hurdle in the traditional narrative, which is the concept of being chosen.
Right. The word used in the text is istifa.
Yes, istifa.
And traditionally, when you hear that Mary was chosen above all women, it implies, well, divine favoritism. It sounds like a mystical lottery, like God pointed a finger down from the clouds and said, you get the miracle.
Right. It implies this bestowal of prophethood or selection for some supernatural biological anomaly.
But when you apply that root word analysis to istifa, the mystical lottery basically vanishes.
Oh, completely. The root does relate to purity, but in the sense of extraction.
Extraction, like refining something.
Yes, like systematic selection for a specific purpose. It means being systematically elevated or appointed for a monumental and, frankly, often incredibly dangerous task.
So it's functional.
Highly functional. It's administrative and deeply practical. It has absolutely nothing to do with biological magic.
So it's the difference between being handed a magical crown just for being pure and being drafted into a special forces unit.
That is a perfect analogy. One is a passive reward, and the other is a terrifying responsibility.
And the source material actually backs this up, right? By showing how the text uses istifa to outline the entire evolution of human civilization.
Yeah, it doesn't just say Maryam was chosen out of a vacuum. It places her at the climax of a four-stage historical progression.
Okay, let's trace that progression for everyone, because I think it really proves the functional nature of the word.
Sure, so the text lists four eras that were istafa, meaning systematically elevated. First is Adam.
But not just the guy in the garden.
Right. In Parwez's rationalist framework, Adam isn't just a single man hanging out in a magical garden. The term represents the dawn of conscious human society itself.
Like the primitive hunter-gatherer stage where humanity first realizes its own intellect.
Exactly, it's humanity waking up. Then it moves to the era of Nu, or Noah,
And again, we usually think of a guy with a big wooden boat and two of every animal.
which is the traditional view. But the sources frame this as the next stage of societal complexity. This is early agricultural society.
Which would require a totally different kind of guidance to survive.
Precisely. They needed basic systemic organization. So the arc represents the formation of a structured community to weather the chaotic forces of early human conflict and environmental disasters.
Okay, so Adam is consciousness, Nu is early structured community.
Yes. And from there, human civilization scales up massively to the era of Ibrahim, or Abraham.
We're not just talking about a single tribe trying to survive a flood anymore.
No, now we are talking about the dawn of city-states, complex trade routes, sophisticated socio-political systems,
So you've got lots of different people rubbing shoulders.
which causes friction. This era required a much more robust legal and ethical framework to manage the interactions of large populations.
Which finally brings us to the fourth stage, the era of Imran.
The era Maryam is born into?
Right. And the sources describe this specific era as a highly intricate, deeply entangled, and massively corrupt sociopolitical system.
We are talking about entrenched institutions, codified laws, hierarchies, sprawling empires like Rome.
So notice how the requirement for guidance changes at each stage for these people.
Exactly. A primitive tribe needs different leadership than a sprawling empire.
Right. So when the text says Maryam was Istafa in the era of Imran, it means she was systematically appointed to tackle the specific, deeply entrenched corruption of a highly complex, institutionalized society.
That's it, exactly. She wasn't chosen to be a prophet with magical powers. The text is actually very clear that prophethood requires direct divine revelation, or wahi.
Which Parwez notes she did not receive.
Right. She didn't get wahi. She was chosen, or drafted essentially, to lead an ideological rebellion against the oppressive man-made system of her specific time.
Man, that makes so much sense. It grounds the whole story in actual history.
It does, and that functional destiny brings us to the second massive linguistic reinterpretation in the sources, the word muharar.
Oh, this one completely flips the script on her childhood.
It really does.
Because the traditional story is almost universally accepted, right?
Yeah.
Miriam's mother, out of deep traditional piety, vows to consecrate her unborn child to the temple.
Right. She intends to make her a captive nun, essentially, bound to the altar for a life of quiet, ascetic worship.
And that reading has been accepted for, what, centuries?
Centuries, millennia, really. But Parwez takes us back to the root DNA of the word the text uses for the mother's vow, muharar.
And the root here is her.
Yes. In classic Arabic, her literally denotes heat, friction, liberation, and freedom.
Wait. So the mother intends to lock her child in a convent. But the text uses a word that means the exact opposite of a captive ascetic.
Precisely. It signifies a free person who possesses the vitality and heat of life. The text is creating a profound, deliberate irony here.
Oh, wow.
The mother is deeply influenced by the conservative, oppressive culture of her time. She genuinely thinks she is doing a holy thing by promising her child to the temple machinery.
Because that's what religious people did back then.
Exactly. But the text uses muharar to reframe the narrative right over the mother's head.
It's effectively saying, you intend to imprison this child in a convent out of traditional devotion.
But the ultimate destiny written into the very vocabulary of her life is her freedom.
That is wild. She was meant to be completely free from worldly and religious chains.
Right. She wasn't meant to be locked away in a dark room quietly praying. She was meant to possess the heat and vitality to participate actively in society.
To cause friction against the system.
Exactly. It changes her from this passive, delicate vessel into a dynamic agent of change.
But, okay, to understand how she could possibly take down an entire system without prophetic revelation or supernatural powers, we have to understand the ground rules of the universe she was operating in.
We do. If we are stripping away the magic from the vocabulary, we have to look at how the universe actually functions according to this text.
And that brings us to the philosophical core of Parwez's analysis, The law of causality? Or sunnatullah?
This is where the rationalist framework really flexes its muscles. Parwez establishes a strict, uncompromising dichotomy between two concepts.
Buddhis and sunnatullah.
Yes. Historically, theologians have leaned really heavily on the idea that God has the absolute power to bypass biological and physical laws whenever he wants.
Right, the idea that God can just snap his fingers and create something out of thin air.
Yeah.
Like a child without a human father.
Exactly. But Parwez argues that the concept of creating from absolute nothingness without pre-existing material is specifically captured by the word badi.
And badi applies to what, exactly?
Yeah. To the initiation of the universe itself. It's the Big Bang. It is the singular moment of original creation.
Okay.
However, and this is the critical pivot, once the universe was initiated, God established sunnatullah.
The fixed, unbreakable laws of cause and effect. The physics, the biology, the chemistry that govern reality.
Exactly. And according to the source material, the Quran vehemently argues against supernatural miracles that bypass these established laws.
So no breaking the rules of physics.
Well then, to create a human child, the established biological law strictly requires the union of a male and a female. Full stop.
And the text points out a purely logical deduction here. Right?
Yes. The deduction is that God does not have a physical counterpart or wife, and therefore cannot have a biological son.
Right.
So, applying that exact same unbroken law of biology, a human child cannot be born to a human woman without the genetic contribution of a human father.
It's a strict, almost scientific adherence to cause and effect.
Yeah.
But I have to push back here, because this is the hurdle most people stumble on when they hear this theory.
Go for it.
If God is all-powerful, the ultimate creator of the universe, doesn't establishing unbreakable laws limit that power?
How do you mean?
I mean, why would a rationalist text argue that God cannot or will not violate his own physical laws to help a believer in distress? Isn't a miracle the ultimate flex of divine power?
It's the most common theological objection, absolutely. But in this rationalist framework, a miracle isn't a flex of power, it's an admission of failure.
Wait, failure?
Think of it like software engineering. A perfect programmer writes an operating system that runs flawlessly, right? It anticipates every single variable.
Yeah.
If the programmer has to constantly pause the system, go into the back end, write a patch, and manually override the code just to keep the system from crashing.
That's not a great programmer.
No.
Yeah.
That's a sign of flawed, buggy software.
Oh, that is a fascinating analogy. Like if I buy a car and the engine keeps stalling and the mechanic has to keep magically jumping in to fix it while I'm driving, that's a terrible car.
Exactly. So God's power is demonstrated precisely in the absolute consistency of the system.
The perfection of the divine system is that the laws of causality are perfectly reliable.
Yes. You can build a civilization on them. You can study agriculture, medicine, physics, precisely because sunnatullah does not change.
If God broke the biological rules to create a virgin birth, it would imply the original biological design was somehow deficient.
And that it needed a magical workaround, which, for Parwez, is an insult to the creator.
Which completely explains how Parwez dismantles the famous story of the out-of-season fruits.
Oh, yes, the fruits.
This is one of the most beloved mystical stories about Maryam. For those who don't know, the story goes that she is locked in her prayer chamber in the temple, right?
Right.
And her guardian, Zachariah, comes to visit her. And he finds her with all these magical out-of-season fruits that just miraculously appeared in her locked room.
Summer fruits in winter, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And when he asks where she got them, she says, it is from Allah, or Indila.
And for centuries, that has been read as a supernatural portal dropping snacks from heaven.
Literally Uber Eats from the divine.
Exactly. But apply the rationalist lens and the root vocabulary to this event.
Okay, let's do it.
The word used is rizq, which simply means provision or sustenance. It's a very standard administrative term.
And Zachariah was her appointed guardian.
Yes, he wasn't just a visitor. He was literally the administrator in charge of her care and schooling.
Right. So Zachariah walks in, and he naturally finds that her assigned caretakers, the people functioning within the administrative system of the temple, had simply brought her food.
Yes. When she says it is from Allah, she is not claiming a magical portal opened in her ceiling.
Right.
She is making a profound philosophical statement about causality.
She's acknowledging that all human effort, like the caretakers walking down the hall with the plate, the farmers planting the wheat, the rain falling on the crops,
And all of it?
Operates under God's overarching natural laws of provision.
Exactly. Acknowledging that food is indila, from God, simply means recognizing the divine origin of the natural laws that allow agriculture and human cooperation to exist in the first place.
It's gratitude for the system.
Right. And Parwez argues that turning this administrative reality into a story about magical fruits is actually incredibly dangerous to human progress.
See, that's what I want to dig into. How is it dangerous? Because to most people, it sounds like a harmless, really nice story about God taking care of a young girl.
It creates learned helplessness.
Learned helplessness.
Think about it. If a culture genuinely believes that their daily provision might magically drop from the sky if they just pray hard enough, they stop planting wheat.
Oh, I see.
If you believe biological laws can be suspended on a whim to cure a disease, you stop funding medical research.
You just wait for the miracle.
It paralyzes the human intellect. It turns faith into a fairy tale that breeds passivity.
And according to this framework, human dignity relies entirely on observing, understanding, and utilizing natural laws.
Exactly. God's treasures are distributed based on a fixed measure that requires human endeavor, sweat, and intellect to extract.
Think about how you operate in your own life as you're listening to this. Why do we as a society often prefer the magical fruit story over the administrative reality of caretakers bringing a young girl her lunch?
Because the magic story is easy.
It's so easy. It asks nothing of us except a sense of awe.
Right.
But a universe governed by strict cause and effect demands our participation. It demands our effort, our intellect, and our courage. We actually have to do the work.
And doing the work requires a specific kind of person, which leads to a really brilliant insight Parwez extracts regarding Maryam's gender.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
So when the mother realizes she has given birth to a female, instead of the male she expected to hand over to the temple priesthood.
She laments, right? She says the male is not like the female.
Yes. And traditionally, that verse is read as a statement of male superiority shaped by the patriarchal culture of the time.
Like, oh no, a girl. She can't be a priest. She can't serve the altar. She's useless to the temple.
Right. But Parwez notes a massive inversion here. Within the context of what Maryam was actually destined to do, which is dismantle the corrupt temple system, that phrase means the exact opposite of what the mother intended.
Because the specific revolutionary task this female would accomplish against the priesthood could never have been achieved by the compliant male priest the mother had originally envisioned.
Never.
Because a male would have just been absorbed into the boys' club.
He would have fit right in. He would have become a priest, enjoyed all the privileges, and become just another gear in the machine.
It required an outsider, a marginalized female who was actively subjugated by the system to actually see its flaws and completely shatter it.
Exactly. A system of oppression is rarely dismantled by the people who benefit from it.
Yeah.
It had to be a female.
And to understand the sheer scale of what she was up against, we really need to look at the historical reality of the system she was living in. We need to define the epic clash between Deen and Mihrab.
Yes, if we're stripping away the magic and the demons, we have to look at the flesh and blood villains of the story.
Let's set the stage. The sources paint a terrifying picture of the socio-political environment. The setting is the Jewish temple, the Haikal, in 1st century Judea.
And we really have to remember the geopolitical context here. Judea was under Roman occupation at the time.
Which means the Romans were the ultimate boss.
Right, but the Roman Empire allowed local religious authorities to maintain control over their own populations as long as they paid their taxes and kept the peace.
So the temple wasn't just a place where people went to pray on the weekend.
Not at all. It was the central bank, the Supreme Court, and the local government all rolled into one massive institution.
Which brings us to the core distinction between Deen and Mazhab. The sources argue that what God actually instituted was Deen.
Yes, Deen is defined as a divine system based on intellect, logic, equitable laws, and human flourishing.
Okay. But what the priests, the Abar, and the monks, the Reuben, had actually built in the temple was Mazhab.
Right, man-made religion.
And Mazhab is characterized by dogma, superstition, and basically the monopolization of power.
Absolute power.
Let's talk about how that power manifested, particularly regarding the practice of Rabbaniyat, asceticism.
This is where it gets really dark. The text describes an institution where young girls who were dedicated by their pious parents were forced to remain captive as nuns for life.
They were called rahiba.
Yes. They were denied the right to marry, denied the right to have families, or to even participate in normal society. They were completely isolated behind stone walls.
And as we know from history, isolation breeds exploitation.
Always. We have to understand the sheer terrifying legal power of this clergy. They didn't just offer spiritual advice to people.
They created a God surrogate authority.
Exactly. By positioning themselves as the sole gatekeepers to the divine, the clergy wielded unchecked power over family laws.
They could arbitrarily dissolve marriages.
Yes, they could declare individuals illegitimate. They enforced self-serving canon laws that kept the populace in total fear of them.
It's honestly like the ultimate company town.
A company town.
Yeah, like think about a mining town in the 19th century. The corporation owns the house you live in, they own the grocery store where you buy your food, and they literally pay the local police force.
Oh, I see.
If you get out of line, they don't just fire you, they evict you, they starve you, and they can legally erase your existence in that community.
That is a chilling comparison, but it's incredibly accurate.
Now add God to that equation. If you challenge the priests, you aren't just losing your job, you are losing your eternal soul, your family, your legal standing in society.
It's a perfect parallel to the sale of indulgences by the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, where salvation was literally commodified by a monopoly.
And Parwez uses this systemic context to profoundly reinterpret another famous phrase from the text.
Shaitani regime.
Right, Satan the expelled. So when Maryam's mother hands her over to the temple, she prays to God to protect her child from Shaitan regime.
And for centuries, people have imagined she is praying to ward off an invisible horned demon hiding in the shadows of the convent.
Like a spooky ghost story.
Exactly. But look at the reality of the institution. Within this highly rationalist systemic context, Parwez argues the devils are very real, visible men.
Oh, wow.
The shaitan refers to the corrupt, exploitative religious authorities who are preying on the dedicated girls within the temple walls.
So the mother's essentially praying, I am handing my daughter over to this deeply corrupt institution because my traditional culture demands it, but please God, protect her from the predators running the place.
Yes. It is a heartbreaking realization of how deeply entrenched mazhab was.
It connects to a broader, tragic historical pattern, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yep.
How often do we see institutions that begin as spiritual centers or places of refuge evolve over centuries into bureaucratic monopolies?
All the time. They create artificial rules to maintain their power.
And eventually, they trap and exploit the very people they were originally designed to protect.
But wait, let's look at the mother for a second. Because it's easy for us, sitting here centuries later with our modern sensibilities, to point fingers and call these priests villains.
Yeah.
But the text explicitly notes that Maryam's mother handed her over out of traditional piety. Weren't these people, the parents, the local community, weren't they just following what they genuinely thought was righteous?
That is exactly the tragedy that the text highlights. Traditional piety is the fuel that the corrupt machine runs on.
So the mother wasn't evil.
No, not at all. She was conditioned. She was acting entirely within the paradigm of mazhab, where she had been taught that suffering, isolation, and asceticism equated to divine favor.
The system sustains itself on the good intentions of the uninformed.
That's a profound way to put it, yeah.
Which means you can't defeat the system just by being angry at it. You can't just pray for a lightning bolt to strike the temple.
No.
Fixing a societal conditioning that deep requires a profound act of intellectual and social rebellion from someone on the inside.
And that brings us to the most intense, pivotal part of Parwez's analysis, the true trial.
Right. To understand what Maryam actually did, we have to completely redefine the concept of asmush, or the divine trial.
We do, because the traditional view of a divine trial is, frankly, pretty grim.
It's the idea that God arbitrarily inflicts suffering just to test your obedience, like a cosmic stress test.
Right. And in Maryam's case, the traditional view is that God's trial was making an innocent, unmarried girl magically pregnant in a deeply conservative, patriarchal society.
Just to see if she would patiently endure the shame and the threat of being stoned to death, which is horrific.
Parwez is exceptionally fierce in his critique here. He argues that this traditional interpretation is a literal slander against the justice of God.
Slander.
Yes. The idea that a perfectly just, rational creator would magically inflict immense societal disgrace and the suspicion of unchastity on an innocent woman as a test is, in his view, absurd.
It turns God into a cruel tormentor playing games with human lives.
Exactly.
So if the trial wasn't a magical pregnancy, what was it?
Parwez redefines asmaish through the lens of cause and effect. A true divine trial isn't an arbitrary punishment dropped from the sky. The true trial is the brutal societal backlash, the the slander, and the systemic persecution that one voluntarily faces when they decide to stand up and challenge entrenched falsehoods.
It is the inescapable friction of fighting a corrupt system.
Exactly. Her trial was her active, calculated rebellion against the Markazi Milat, the central religious authority.
And the source material says she used independent critical thought to Tafakkur.
Tafakkur, yes. She didn't just passively sit in her cell. She observed the system around her. She used her intellect and realized that the monastic system of enforced celibacy, isolation, and exploitation was inherently false.
It went against the natural laws of Deen, which require human beings to live actively in the world.
Exactly. She realized the iron chains of the clergy were completely fabricated. They weren't from God.
And then she committed the ultimate crime against the institution.
She took action.
She abandoned the convent. She literally just walked out. I mean, imagine you are standing in that temple courtyard. You are a young woman whose entire legal and social existence is owned by the most powerful man in the country.
It's unthinkable for most people in that era.
Stepping out of that convent meant losing her community, her physical safety, her family's reputation.
Everything.
She was facing the wrath of authorities who had the legal power, backed by Roman swords, to completely ruin her life.
Yeah.
That is a terrifying reality.
It is a staggering display of ideological courage. And what she did next was the final nail in the coffin of their authority over her.
What did she do?
She returned to society and she entered into a perfectly valid, legitimate, natural marriage, a nikah.
According to universal laws.
Yes.
But wait, if she just walked out and got married like a normal human being under the laws of causality, where does the story of the virgin birth come from? Like, how did we get from a rebellious whistleblower getting married to the most famous supernatural event in history?
This is the ultimate aha moment of Parwez's extraction. The source of the virgin birth, or fatherless myth, wasn't a biological miracle. It was historical slander.
How does that work? Break that down for us.
Think about the legal power of the clergy we discussed earlier. To punish her rebellion, the temple priests used their absolute authority over family law to declare her natural marriage void.
Oh, wow.
Because she broke their canon law by leaving the temple, they declared her an apostate, a criminal.
So they legally nullified her marriage.
Yes. And by nullifying the marriage, they declared her child illegitimate. A mamzer in the terminology at the time.
So the priesthood essentially said, you defied us, so we do not recognize your husband. Therefore, legally, your child has no father.
Exactly. They weaponized the law to ruin her reputation. The fatherless label was a vicious smear campaign by a corrupt priesthood trying to destroy a whistleblower's life.
That is unbelievable.
But here is how history turns into myth to serve the powerful. Centuries later, other religious traditions took that historical slander, spun it around, and turned it into a supernatural miracle.
To make Jesus seem like a literal demigod.
Yes. They took a political excommunication and translated it as biological magic.
That is mind-blowing.
It really recontextualizes everything.
So the text, according to Parwez, is vigorously defending Maryam's chastity, her ismat.
Yes.
But it isn't defending it as a biological anomaly or like an intact hymen preserved by magic.
No, no.
It is defending her chastity as absolute moral purity. She lived a pure life, entered a legitimate marriage under God's natural laws, and bravely defied the oppressive, fabricated decrees of the religious clerics.
Exactly. And this reframing has massive implications for how we view her son, Jesus.
Right. Why did he grow up to launch a massive revolutionary movement against the Roman-backed clergy? Was it because he was half spirit?
No. He launched a revolution because he was raised by a woman who provided the exact blueprint for dismantling their authority.
Her personal rebellion proved that the system was not absolute. It proved the clergy were not God.
Right. By reclaiming her autonomy and surviving the slander, she demonstrated that the iron chains of the institution were only as strong as the people's belief in them.
Which brings us to the final and honestly perhaps most important aspect of Parwez's analysis.
The actionable steps.
Right. He doesn't just leave this as a fascinating alternative history lesson. He extracts specific, actionable steps from Maryam's story based on the principles of Adl, which is justice, and Rububiyat, which is providence.
He essentially translates her first-century rebellion into a modern blueprint for implementing a rational, equitable social order.
Let's break down this blueprint, because if we reverse engineer her rebellion, we get a highly structured set of action items. The sources divide these into distinct domains. Let's start with the strategic domain.
Okay.
Dismantle oppressive religious monopolies.
This is the highest priority. The modern imperative, derived directly from the Haikal narrative, is to systematically eradicate the authority of clergy classes.
Whether they are priests, mullahs, rabbis, or gurus.
Anyone who acts as a gatekeeper to God, any institution that monopolizes family laws, that holds arbitrary, unchecked authority over marriage, divorce, or social standing to exploit individuals, that must be dismantled.
Because anytime you allow a group of humans to create a God-surrogate authority, you inevitably recreate the exact same corruption Maryam was fighting.
It's the ultimate anti-monopoly law, but applied to theology.
Right. Moving to the process domain, the next imperative is to eradicate asceticism and protect women's autonomy.
Yes, this means abolishing any cultural frameworks that subjugate women under the guise of piety.
So no more forcing people into isolated institutions that deny them their natural rights to family and social participation.
Exactly. And the sources frame the rejection of asceticism as an absolute prerequisite for human development.
Because you cannot grow if you retreat from society's challenges.
You just can't. The divine order, Deen, requires navigating the friction of human relations. It requires you to be her to possess the heat and vitality of life.
Hiding from the world in a monastery or a convent might feel safe, but it fundamentally stunts the intellectual and moral development of humanity.
Precisely. Which brings us to the technical domain, redefining scriptural vocabulary.
This is what we did at the very beginning of this deep dive. We need to teach these texts through root analysis, explicitly rejecting magical translations that paralyze practical human effort.
As we discussed with the concept of risk, the provisions. If you teach people that provisions drop from the sky, they won't build irrigation systems.
Language dictates action.
It does. If our vocabulary is magical, our societal response to crisis will be passive.
Finally, we have the most critical action item, the one that makes all the others possible. Institutionalize independent critical thinking, or tafakkur.
This means actively fostering environments where youth, and specifically women, are encouraged to independently analyze scripture.
To question societal norms.
And to refuse to blindly inherit dogma. It's about emulating Maryam's core methodology.
Her superpower wasn't a magic spell.
No, it was her intellect. She had the courage to look at the world around her, realize it was broken, and fundamentally refuse to participate in the brokenness.
Reflecting on this entire journey, it is incredibly liberating. I mean, if you listening have ever felt overwhelmed by complex, gate-kept information,
And we all have.
whether you are dealing with rigid theology, a convoluted legal system, or even just navigating a toxic corporate bureaucracy, the lesson here is that critical, independent thought is your inherent right.
It is not a privilege granted to you by an institution.
That realization is the very core of Hurriyat, true freedom. But let me play devil's advocate for one final second.
Sure.
These action items, dismantling monopolies, changing the entire educational paradigm of society,
Yeah.
they are massive systemic goals.
CR.
For the person listening to us right now who is commuting to work or making dinner or just trying to get through the week, what is the micro application of this philosophy tomorrow morning? How do you actually live this in an everyday context?
Well, the macro rebellion always starts internally. The micro application starts with questioning the magic in your own life.
Questioning the magic.
Yes. Where are you waiting for a miracle when you should be taking practical, natural steps to solve a problem?
Oh, that's good.
Where are you hoping for an out-of-season fruit to drop into your lap instead of doing the hard, tedious work of planting the seeds, tending the soil, and utilizing the laws of cause and effect?
Maryam didn't wait to be rescued by a lightning bolt.
No, she didn't. She analyzed the system, she gathered her courage, and she walked out the door. Refusing to be passive in the face of your own life's challenges. That is how you apply this tomorrow morning.
Wow. Okay, let's wrap this up. We have journeyed through an incredibly dense, paradigm-shifting reinterpretation today.
We really covered a lot of ground.
We started by completely decoding ancient vocabulary, stripping away the magic from words like chosen and consecrated, and finding the gritty, administrative reality underneath.
We explored the immense philosophical weight of the law of causality, understanding that a universe run on reliable, consistent rules is infinitely more empowering than a universe reliant on arbitrary miracles.
We watched a historical rebellion unfold against a deeply corrupt Roman-backed clergy, redefining Maryam's trial not as a magical pregnancy, but as the brutal, terrifying societal backlash of standing up for the truth.
And finally, we looked at how Parwez translated her survival into a modern blueprint for critical thinking, autonomy, and the dismantling of institutional monopolies.
So why does a textual analysis of Arabic verses written centuries ago matter to you today?
It matters because it's a powerful reminder.
Exactly. It's a reminder that being genuinely well-informed isn't just about absorbing facts or reciting the accepted historical narrative.
It is about having the courage to look past inherited dogma.
It's about questioning the magic, whatever form that takes in your life, and seeing the profound, sweaty, brilliant human effort underneath it all.
It is the ultimate call to recognize your own agency in a universe of cause and effect.
Exactly. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. If one of the most famous, seemingly untouchable supernatural stories in human history can be rationally decoded as a massive political and social rebellion by a brave woman who just decided she'd had enough of a corrupt system,
Right.
what other historical myths are actually just buried stories of human agency, waiting for us to uncover them?
It certainly makes you wonder how many other brilliant revolutionaries have been silenced by history simply by being turned into saints.
It really does. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narrative, keep looking for the root of things, and keep unpacking the world around you. We'll see you next time.